The emergency sirens of the Wanderer wailed as Captain Jax Matthews wrestled with the failing controls. The cargo hauler shuddered violently, its ancient frame protesting as warning lights flashed across the cockpit's cracked display panels. "Come on, you piece of junk," Jax muttered, his weathered face illuminated by the red glow of emergency lighting. The ship's engine had finally given out, just as he'd feared it would during this less-than-legal cargo run to the outer rim. He'd pushed the old girl too far this time. Through the viewport, the toxic surface of Xylos Prime loomed ever closer, a massive junkyard planet where the galaxy's waste came to die. Colossal mountains of discarded technology and industrial refuse dominated the landscape, with only scattered pockets of ramshackle settlements breaking the monotony of metal and pollution. Jax had no choice. He activated the emergency landing protocols and braced himself. The Wanderer screamed through Xylos Prime's noxious atmosphere, pieces of its outer hull tearing away before it crashed into a valley of twisted metal and obsolete machinery. The impact knocked Jax forward, his forehead colliding with the control panel. When the ringing in his ears subsided, he assessed the damage. He was alive, a miracle in itself, but the Wanderer would never fly again without a quantum stabilizer, one of the rarest ship components in the galaxy. Jax gathered his emergency pack, slipped his blaster into its holster, and reluctantly stepped out into the caustic air of Xylos Prime. The central scrapyard market of Xylos Prime was a labyrinth of makeshift stalls and towering piles of salvage. The air hung thick with the stench of oil, ozone, and desperation. Harsh artificial lights cast long shadows across the faces of the planet's inhabitants, a motley collection of species from across the galaxy, most with the hard, suspicious eyes of those who survive by scavenging or cheating. Jax moved through the crowds, asking discreetly about quantum stabilizers, only to be met with derisive laughter or exorbitant price quotes. His credit chip wouldn't cover even a tenth of what they were asking. Hours passed, and frustration gnawed at him as his options dwindled. He was stranded on this toxic wasteland, possibly for good. It was while examining a heap of engine parts at a particularly questionable stall that Jax first noticed her. She stood alone amid the market's chaos, seemingly untouched by the constant flow of bodies around her. The alien woman had skin that resembled cracked porcelain, with luminescent blue patterns running through the fissures like glowing rivers. Her left arm was a crude mechanical prosthetic, assembled from mismatched parts that whirred softly as she moved. Her eyes were most striking, one a deep emerald, the other a milky white with a vertical pupil. Her face was asymmetrical, with one side featuring delicate ridges while the other was smooth but marred by what appeared to be burn scars. But it wasn't her appearance that caught Jax's attention. It was how everyone else reacted to her. Merchants pulled their wares away as she approached. Others whispered behind their hands, using words like monstrosity and abomination. Children were hurried away by their parents. The woman seemed to exist in a bubble of revulsion that the crowd maintained around her. Jax returned to his haggling, trying to ignore the scene. It wasn't his business. Survival on Xylos Prime was hard enough without involving himself in others' problems. Then a group of junkers, rough salvagers known for their territorial violence, began taunting her openly. "Hey, ugly," one called out, his voice slurred from cheap synth alcohol. "This isn't a freak show. Go back to whatever lab made you." His companions laughed, emboldened by his cruelty. One tossed a handful of scrap metal at her feet. Another spat in her direction. The woman remained perfectly still, her mismatched eyes fixed on some distant point, her face a mask of practiced indifference. She didn't challenge them, didn't run, just endured, as though this treatment was an expected part of her existence. Something about her silent dignity pricked at Jax's conscience. He'd spent years cultivating his indifference, learning to look out for himself and nobody else in a galaxy that rewarded selfishness. But something about this scene, perhaps the sheer injustice of it, or maybe a flicker of recognition in the acceptance of cruelty, made him pause. Before he could reconsider, Jax found himself walking toward the commotion. The Junkers noticed his approach, hands drifting toward concealed weapons. "Problem?" the leader asked, squaring his shoulders. Jax ignored him completely, turning instead to the alien woman. Looking directly into her mismatched eyes, he spoke clearly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I don't know what they're looking at. I think you're beautiful." The market seemed to hold its breath. The Junkers stared in disbelief. A few onlookers snickered, assuming this was some elaborate joke at the woman's expense. The alien woman froze, her heterochromatic eyes widening as she searched Jax's face for signs of mockery or deception. Finding none, her composure cracked. Her mechanical hand twitched at her side, and her breathing became irregular. Then, to Jax's complete bewilderment, she slowly sank to her knees in the middle of the dusty marketplace. Her hands, one flesh, one metal, covered her face as her shoulders began to shake with silent, convulsive sobs. Jax stood rooted to the spot, utterly unprepared for this response. He'd expected a nod of thanks, perhaps, or a dismissive gesture. Not this raw, uncontained emotion that seemed to pour from her like water from a broken dam. The crowd dispersed awkwardly, even the Junkers backing away from the scene, muttering under their breath. Jax was left standing alone before the kneeling, weeping woman, feeling a complicated mixture of embarrassment and strange responsibility. "Hey," he said finally, crouching down beside her. "Look, I didn't mean to. Are you okay?" The alien woman's sobs gradually subsided, but she remained hunched over, her face hidden. After what seemed like an eternity, she lowered her hands slightly, revealing her tear-streaked face. "Why?" she asked, her voice surprisingly melodious despite its roughness, as though it hadn't been used in a long time. "Why what?" Jax asked, glancing around uncomfortably. "Why would you say that?" She studied him with a scientist's intensity, as though he were a specimen exhibiting unexpected behavior. Jax shrugged. "Because it's what I saw." "Is that so strange?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she rose gracefully to her feet, the mechanical arm adjusting with a series of quiet clicks. "You need something," she stated rather than asked. "No one speaks to me without wanting something." Jax couldn't deny it. "I need a quantum stabilizer for my ship. Got anything resembling one in this junkyard?" He expected a negative response. Everyone else had laughed at his request, but the woman's expression changed subtly. "I know where one might be," she said quietly, "but it's deep in the toxic zones, where the metal storms are strongest." Jax's heart leaped. "You serious? You're not just—" "I do not joke," she cut him off. "Especially not about technology." "What's your price?" Jax asked cautiously. In his experience, nothing on Xylos Prime came without steep costs. The woman hesitated, her mechanical fingers flexing uncertainly. "Protection," she finally said. "While we search, there are those who would harm me if they found me alone in the scrap fields." Jax considered the proposal. Venturing into the toxic zones was dangerous enough without babysitting duty, but a quantum stabilizer would mean freedom from this hellhole. And something about the woman's quiet dignity moved him in ways he couldn't articulate. "Deal," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Jax." She regarded his outstretched hand with momentary confusion before carefully taking it with her flesh hand. Her skin was cool to the touch and surprisingly soft. "Lyra," she replied. Over the next few days, they established a tense working relationship in the relative safety of the Wanderer's damaged hull. Jax had managed to restore emergency power, creating a small sanctuary from Xylos Prime's toxic atmosphere. Lyra moved around the ship with surprising familiarity, examining its systems with expert precision. "You know ships," Jax observed on the second evening as Lyra disassembled a navigation panel with remarkable efficiency. "I know machines," she corrected without looking up. "Their logic is consistent. Predictable." The implication hung in the air, unlike people. Jax leaned against the bulkhead, watching her work. Her mechanical arm contained specialized tools that extended from compartments when needed. She manipulated delicate circuitry with both incredible precision and surprising tenderness. Where'd you learn that? He asked. Lyra remained focused on her task. Necessity. Jax recognized the evasion for what it was, a barrier erected from years of distrust. He didn't push. They worked in silence until nightfall, when the toxic winds outside howled against the ship's hull. On the third day, they ventured into the outer scrap fields, searching for components needed before their main expedition into the toxic zones. Lyra moved with surprising agility across the treacherous landscape, her knowledge of the terrain proving invaluable. How long have you been on this trash heap? Jax asked as they picked their way through a canyon of compressed industrial waste. 7 orbital cycles, she replied. It is one of the few places one may exist without documentation. Jax nodded, understanding immediately. Undocumented meant invisible, and invisible meant safe for certain definitions of safety. Their search was interrupted by a gang of scrap. Pirates, opportunistic thieves who preyed on salvagers. They emerged from hidden positions, weapons drawn, demanding everything of value. Jax reached for his blaster, calculating odds that looked increasingly poor as more pirates appeared. 6 against 2, with little cover available. We don't want trouble, he started, buying time. Trouble found you anyway, Spacer. The lead pirate sneered, aiming a rusty disruptor at Jax's chest. Before Jax could respond, Lyra stepped forward and raised her mechanical arm. With a quick series of gestures, her fingers reconfigured into something resembling an antenna. A high-pitched whine emanated from the device, causing the pirates to clutch their heads in pain as their weapons' power cells overloaded and died. Run, she told Jax calmly, already moving. They fled through the maze of scrap, Lyra leading the way through passages too narrow for their pursuers to follow, eventually circling back to the Wanderer through a route so convoluted Jax couldn't have retraced it if he tried. That was... Jax paused, catching his breath inside the ship's airlock. What did you do back there? Electromagnetic pulse, Lyra explained, her mechanical arm cooling with soft hisses. Focused. Temporary. She glanced at him. I have modifications. I noticed, Jax said, a newfound respect in his voice. Saved our skins. A ghost of a smile flickered across Lyra's asymmetrical features, the first Jax had seen, before disappearing behind her usual composed expression. As days stretched into a week, their initial wariness gradually softened into something resembling comfortable companionship. During the long evenings, as Xylos Prime's toxic storms made outside work impossible, they talked more freely. Jax found himself sharing stories of failed heists and abandoned dreams, of the promising military career he'd walked away from after witnessing atrocities he couldn't unsee. Lyra listened with quiet attention, offering little judgment. Occasionally, she would ask a question that cut straight to the heart of matter, revealing a perceptiveness that continually surprised him. On the 8th night, as they huddled in the ship's small galley while a particularly violent metal storm raged outside, Lyra finally began to share her own story. I was not born this way, she said suddenly, interrupting the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. Her mechanical fingers traced the luminescent cracks in her skin. I was conventional once, by the standards of my kind. Jax remained silent, instinctively understanding the value of this moment. My people are called the Etheri. We were researchers, scientists. Our world orbited a dying star, and we sought ways to survive its eventual supernova. Her mismatched eyes grew distant. I specialized in biological adaptation, finding ways our bodies might withstand extreme conditions. She extended her flesh hand, turning it palm up to reveal more intricate luminescent patterns. These are not scars. They are pathways, living technology designed to enhance cellular regeneration and resistance to radiation. You experimented on yourself, Jax realized. Lyra nodded. When our Central Science Council rejected my proposals as too radical, I continued alone. I was arrogant, believed I could advance our species single-handedly. Her voice hardened. The process was imperfect. The technology merged with my genetic structure in ways I hadn't anticipated. In your arm, lost in the same incident. The explosion that transformed me also destroyed my laboratory. She flexed the mechanical appendage. I constructed this replacement myself. It is crude, but functional. And your people? A shadow crossed Lyra's face. They were disturbed by what I had become. In our culture, symmetry is sacred. It represents balance and harmony with the universe. My new form was seen as an abomination, a desecration of natural law. She swallowed hard. They gave me a choice: undergo correction that would likely kill me, or exile. So you ran. I chose to live, she corrected firmly, even in this form. Jax considered her words carefully. In my travels, I've seen beings of every shape and size, some with tentacles for faces, some made entirely of sentient gas, some that look like walking nightmares. He gestured toward her. Those cracks in your skin, they're beautiful, like rivers of light. Where I come from, there are ancient art forms that fill breaks in pottery with gold. The damage becomes part of the beauty. Lyra looked away, clearly uncomfortable with his words. Beauty is irrelevant. Function matters. Is it, though? Jax persisted. The way those junkers treated you in the market, that bothered you. Not because it impeded your function. Lyra fell silent, her expression unreadable. The conversation was interrupted by an alarm from the ship's partially functioning communication system. Jax hurried to the cockpit, Lyra following close. Behind, on the cracked display, a message flashed in universal trade language. Attention Xylos Prime inhabitants. Substantial reward for information leading to capture of Ethery fugitive. Identifiable by asymmetrical features and bioluminescent dermal patterns. Approach with caution. Contact Galactic Science Consortium representatives. Accompanying the message was a grainy image that, despite its poor quality, was unmistakably Lyra. They found me, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling storm outside. Who exactly is looking for you? Jax asked, scanning the message again. This consortium, they're not your people, are they? Lyra's hand trembled slightly. No, they are. Collectors. They gather unique biological specimens for study. They have been pursuing me since they learned of my existence. Her voice grew hard. They do not consider modified beings like myself to have rights. To them, I am merely a successful experiment to be dissected and analyzed. Jax felt a cold anger rise within him. Well, they're not getting you. We'll accelerate our plans. Get the quantum stabilizer tomorrow, fix the ship, and be off this rock before they can organize a proper search. Lyra looked at him with genuine surprise. You would still help me? Even knowing that association with me puts you at risk. Jax hadn't actually considered doing otherwise, which surprised him. When had this strange woman's welfare become so important to him? Look, he said awkwardly, I made a deal. You help me get off this planet. I keep you safe. Nothing's changed. But something had changed, and they both knew it. The unspoken truth hung between them as they prepared for the dangerous expedition into the toxic zones the following day. As dawn broke over Xylos Prime's scarred horizon, they set out. Lyra had modified their environmental suits to withstand the deadly conditions of the deep scrap fields. The mods looked questionable. Additional filter layers attached with industrial sealant, makeshift energy shields cobbled together from salvage components. But Lyra assured him they would function. How far are we going? Jax asked as they traversed increasingly unstable terrain. The quantum stabilizer is in a crashed Imperial science vessel, Lyra explained, in the heart of the Rust Valley. Jack stopped in his tracks. The Rust Valley? No one goes there and comes back. The metal storms will shred us. Not with these, Lyra replied, activating a device on her mechanical arm. A faint blue field shimmered around them both. Electromagnetic deflection. The storms are mostly charged particles. We will have approximately 42 minutes before power depletion. Jax shook his head in amazement. If you can build tech like this from scrap, why are you stuck on this junkyard planet? Where else would someone like me go? She asked simply. They pressed on, the terrain becoming increasingly treacherous as they descended into the infamous Rust Valley. True to its name, Everything was covered in red-brown oxidation that crumbled at the slightest touch. The air, visible even through their protective gear, swirled with metallic particles that would tear unprotected flesh to ribbons. Lyra's shield technology performed as promised, creating a bubble of safety around them as they navigated the valley. The crashed Imperial vessel came into view, a massive research ship half buried in decades of accumulated debris. There, Lyra pointed to a partially exposed section of the ship's engine compartment. The quantum stabilizer would have been housed in the central propulsion chamber. They worked quickly, aware of the shield's limited power. Jax used a salvaged cutting tool to create an opening while Lyra monitored the storm's intensity. The metal parted reluctantly, revealing the ship's massive engine room. 40 years of advanced technology just abandoned. Jax marveled as they entered. The Empire does not salvage failures, Lyra replied. More efficient to build anew than to learn from mistakes. They located the quantum stabilizer, remarkably intact despite the ship's condition. As Jax carefully disconnected it from its housing, a tremor ran through the wreckage. "What was that?" he asked, freezing in place. Lyra's expression became alarmed as she checked a scanner built into her mechanical arm. Movement on the surface. Large vehicles. She met his eyes. "They're already here. The consortium. How? That bounty just went out yesterday." They were already close, Lyra realized, tracking me across systems. She shuddered visibly. "We must hurry." They secured the stabilizer and began their retreat, but the crashed ship had become unstable, sections collapsing as they navigated back through the wreckage. A secondary explosion from ruptured fuel cells threw them both forward, Jax barely managing to keep the precious stabilizer from being damaged. When they emerged onto the valley floor, the shield projector was sputtering, its power nearly depleted. Through the failing barrier, they could see distant lights, vehicles descending into the valley from multiple directions. "They're cutting off escape routes," Jax observed grimly. "Standard containment protocol." Lyra looked at him with surprise. "You know military tactics." "Former Imperial tactical officer," he admitted. "Before I left the service." They plotted a course through the least monitored sector, but progress was painfully slow. The shield failed completely as they reached the valley's edge, leaving them exposed to the caustic environment. Their modified suits provided protection, but the metal particles in the air reduced visibility to near zero. "Stay close," Jax ordered, securing a tether between them. They navigated by instinct and Lyra's occasional guidance, relying on her intimate knowledge of Xylos Prime's dangerous terrain. A patrol of consortium enforcers nearly discovered them in a narrow ravine. Jax and Lyra pressed themselves into a crevice, hardly daring to breathe as the heavily armed figures passed within meters of their position. Once clear, they continued their desperate journey toward the Wanderer. They were within sight of the ship when disaster struck. A consortium dropship descended directly in their path, powerful spotlights sweeping the area. There was no way to reach the ship without being seen. "We need a diversion," Jax whispered, assessing their options. "I can create one," Lyra said with quiet determination. "But you must take the stabilizer and reach your ship." "What?" "No. We go together or not at all." Lyra placed her flesh hand on his arm. "Jax, you don't understand. What I'm about to do. It's why they want me." She took a deep breath. "The modifications I made to myself, they're not just for survival. They're weapons." Before Jax could object further, Lyra removed her protective helmet. The luminescent patterns on her skin began to pulse with increasing intensity. "Get to the ship," she instructed. "Be ready to lift off in exactly 3 minutes." Without waiting for his response, she stepped out from their cover and walked directly toward the consortium forces. Her entire body now glowed with blinding blue-white energy that arced between the cracks in her skin. The consortium enforcers immediately surrounded her, weapons raised. Through his visor's magnification, Jax could see a figure in elaborate protective gear step forward, presumably a senior researcher. "Specimen L7, the figure addressed Lyra. "Your continued evasion has been most inconvenient." Your body contains proprietary ethery biotechnology that legally belongs to the consortium. I belong to myself, Lyra replied, her voice carrying clearly across the distance. The researcher gestured dismissively. A philosophical debate for another time. Now, you'll come with us, or we will be forced to remove your modifications surgically after neutralization. Lyra's glow intensified. The Ethery designed this technology to withstand a supernova, she said calmly. Do you truly believe you can contain it? The researcher took an uncertain step backward. Restrain her, he ordered his enforcers. That's when Lyra released the energy she had been accumulating. A wave of blinding blue light erupted from her body, expanding outward in a perfect sphere. Where it touched the consortium's vehicles and weapons, systems failed instantly. Enforcers dropped to the ground, their powered armor locking into immobility as the electromagnetic pulse fried their circuits. In the chaos, Jax ran for the ship, clutching the quantum stabilizer. He worked feverishly to install it, aware that Lyra couldn't hold off the consortium forever. Through the viewport, he could see her surrounded by a nimbus of crackling energy, holding the enforcers at bay as they attempted to approach with non-electronic restraints. The moment the stabilizer was connected, the Wanderer's systems began to reboot. Jax fired up the engines and guided the ship toward Lyra's position, opening the cargo bay doors as he approached. He could see her strength failing, the glow of her skin beginning to dim as consortium reinforcements arrived. "Lyra!" he shouted over the external comm system. "Jump!" She looked up, exhaustion evident in her face. With one final burst of energy that knocked back the closest enforcers, she sprinted toward the hovering ship and leaped into the open cargo bay. Jax slammed the controls, closing the doors as weapons fire peppered the hull. He pushed the engines to maximum thrust, guiding the Wanderer into a steep climb away from Xylos Prime's toxic surface. Consortium ships gave chase, but the quantum stabilizer gave the Wanderer capabilities it had never possessed before. Jax executed a series of maneuvers that would have torn the ship apart without the stabilizer's compensating effects. One by one, the pursuers fell behind until, finally, they broke through Xylos Prime's upper atmosphere into open space. Jax set a course for the nearest jump point, engaged the autopilot, and hurried back to the cargo bay. He found Lyra collapsed on the floor, the luminescent patterns on her skin barely glowing. Her mechanical arm had shut down completely. "Lyra," he said, kneeling beside her. "What did you do back there?" She opened her eyes with visible effort. "Electromagnetic discharge. It is taxing. You could have been killed. Or worse, captured." A faint smile touched her lips. "Worth the risk. Freedom is worth any risk." Jax helped her to the crew quarters, where she could rest and recover. The luminescence in her skin gradually returned over the following hours as the Wanderer put distance between them and Xylos Prime. Later, as Lyra sat in the co-pilot's seat watching the stars streak by, she confessed, "I never expected to leave that planet. I believed it would be my tomb." Jax glanced at her. What changed? She was quiet for a long moment. Someone saw beauty where others saw only monstrosity. Her flesh hand unconsciously traced the glowing patterns on her face. It made me wonder if perhaps I had been wrong. If perhaps there was a place for me in this galaxy after all. "There is," Jack said with certainty. "The question is, where do you want to go? I can drop you at any civilized system." "No," Lyra interrupted. "I have no desire to be among civilization. They would not understand me any more than the Ethery did." "Then what do you want?" Lyra considered the question as though it were entirely new to her. "I want to find others like me. Those who have been changed, modified, enhanced, and cast out for it. There must be others." Jax nodded slowly. "A community of outcasts. It's possible." He pulled up the ship's navigation system. "I've heard rumors of station in the outer reach. No questions asked, no documentation required. All manner of beings coexist there. It might be a place to start. Would you take me there?" Lyra asked hesitantly. Jax looked at her in surprise. "You want me to stay with you? Even after we reach the station?" Lyra met his gaze directly, her mismatched eyes unwavering. You see things others do not. That is valuable to me. Jax felt something unfamiliar stir within him, a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced since before his disillusionment with the Empire. The cargo hauling business has gotten pretty dull anyway, he said with a half-smile. Finding a hidden community of modified beings sounds like a much more interesting challenge. You would do this? Become, what? A searcher for lost things? For lost people, Jax corrected. And yes, I would. He studied the navigation chart. The galaxy's full of those who've been cast aside because they don't fit neatly into categories. Maybe they need someone looking for them. Lyra nodded, a genuine smile transforming her asymmetrical features. Then we searched together. As the Wanderer accelerated toward the jump point, Jax glanced at Lyra, seeing not the cracks and asymmetry that had first caught his eye, but the strength and resilience they represented. The luminescence that had once seemed strange now appeared as what it truly was, light shining through broken places. You know, he said casually, I meant what I said that first day, about you being beautiful. This time, Lyra didn't cry. She held his gaze steadily, her eyes clear and certain. I believe you now, she said simply. And in those words was a universe of change. The Wanderer leaped into hyperspace, carrying its mismatched crew toward an uncertain but promising future. Two broken souls who had found, in each other's cracks and imperfections, an unexpected wholeness.